Please welcome Catrin Einhorn, Senior Staff Editor, and her guest, Dr. Jane Goodall, founder of the Jane Goodall Institute and UN Messenger of Peace.
We'll start so that we can get all our questions in. What a treat to be here with you. How are you? How are you doing?
Well, I'm surviving.
I looked back into the New York Times archive because I wanted to see when was the first time that we mentioned you in the New York Times. It was February 1964. And I'm going to read just a little bit. They described you as follows. Jane Goodall, a 29-year-old English scientist who has spent more than 3 years in the wilds of East Africa, fragile and blonde, with huge green eyes and a tip-tilted nose. She looks as if she should be pouring tea or watering the roses, instead of prowling the bush from dawn to dark, studying the behavioral patterns of our furry friends. What does that bring up in you now?
Well, I think, first of all, it seemed ridiculous because I'd never been like that. But it just shows how women were thought of in those days. It's interesting. It's history.
There's been some progress, I imagine, in your lifetime. In other ways, though, you've seen the other direction, right, in terms of nature loss. I mean, some of that you've witnessed. You turned 90 this year. You're traveling like 300 days a year, right? Raising awareness, on these issues and for your institute. It's more than most 25-year-olds could manage. And I've gotten the sense, speaking with you previously, that it's not necessarily something you enjoy. It's rather something you see as a duty. Is that right? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, first of all, it was really sad when I had to leave Gombe. That was my paradise, being out in the forest, feeling that spiritual connection to the natural world, learning about our closest living relatives. But I left because I realized in 1986 that forests were disappearing across Africa and chimp numbers were dropping. And I just, I went to that conference as a scientist. I left as an activist. It just happened like that. And I didn't really know what to do. But learning about the plight of the chimps, by then there were 6 other field research sites where scientists were studying chimps. When I began, it was just me. And learning about the problems facing the chimps, but also the plight of so many of the African people living in and around chimp habitat, crippling poverty, lack of health, education facilities. So the forests were going because the people were struggling to survive, to make money from charcoal or timber or clear land to grow more food for their families.
And how did you confront that? Talk a little bit about the community-led conservation that you tried to put into place.
Yes, well, this started actually in 1990, understanding that, unless we could help these people find ways of making a living without destroying the environment, we couldn't save chimps, forests, or anything else. And so I was working with a wonderful man, George Strundan, who'd been in Tanzania 15 years. And he was so wise. He said, Jane, we will start off not talking about saving wildlife, but helping the people find other ways of making a living.
And did you ask them what they wanted? Is that what you did?
So instead of a bunch of arrogant white people going into a poor village and telling them what we were going to do, it was a local team of Tanzanians, 7 of them. And they went into the villages and asked the people what they would like us to do to help them restore fertility to overused farmland, which without chemicals, by the way, and also better health and education for their children. That's where we began. And then it became very holistic. Scholarships to give girls a chance of secondary education. They had no chance back then. This is early 1990s. And microfinance, I was passionate about that because Muhammad Yunus took me to Bangladesh, and I met the women who for the first time had had money in their hands. When they thought about it before, they cried.
And he'll be your life's work, right? And that's these massive declines in biodiversity, this biodiversity loss, biodiversity being the variety of life on the planet. And, you know, these are often called twin crises, and it's a useful metaphor because they're connected, but they're also separate. Our attempts to confront one can have positive or negative effects on the other, right? I wonder, with so much of the world's attention focused on climate change, if you think the biodiversity crisis is getting a short shrift, not enough focus.
Well, not really, because as you say, they're so interconnected that if we tackle climate change, we're also helping to reverse the loss of biodiversity.
But not in every case, right? For example, you know, big solar farms can take up habitat, wind turbines can kill bats and raptors. I mean, there are some trade-offs, and I wonder how you grapple with that a bit.
Well, I try to do what we're doing with the Jane Goodall Institute, which is tackle the two closely together. And, you know, there's always going to be conflict. Some people say, I'm going to solve that problem like this. And unless they're thinking holistically, they're not realizing that that is going to create a problem somewhere else. So we try to think holistically and think, well, if we save that piece of environment, are we then, you know, it may be affecting people, it may be affecting wildlife. We've got to think of the thing as a whole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So bringing people together to find the solutions, and there certainly are, right? For example, I worked on a story where they're going to try and put pronghorn and mule deer corridors through a solar farm. Is it things like this that need to happen?
Yes. Well, first of all, you know, we must move away from industrial agriculture, which is not only terrible for biodiversity, but it's actually killing the soil. And, you know, we now know that all over the world, people have plastic, microscopic bits of plastic in their bodies. And what we've done to people, what we've done to the planet is terrible. And so we have to get together. I learned from the planetary guardians who made a map of the health of the planet today. We've got 5 years to try and start reversing.
It's happening on a lot of fronts. And I think it can feel really overwhelming for people. One of your messages to the public early this year was vote, right? You were telling everyone to get out and vote. And of course, in Mexico, they elected a climate scientist who's going to be taking office. Here in the US, you know, polls show our presidential candidates are really neck and neck. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of the stakes of the US presidential election a bit, and whether there's one candidate whose sort of policies and actions would more align, I believe, with yours. And I wonder if you will make an endorsement.
There have been 48 countries around the world with important elections. And what I have said everywhere is, you know, so many people are fed up with politics, and I don't blame them, and they just don't want to vote at all. And so what I've been saying is, you know, you've got to think, you may not care too much about either candidate, but is one of them more likely to help protect the planet for your future, for your children's future? And your vote will count. And so please register and vote for the candidate you believe will be better for the future.
And if you were an American citizen, who would you be voting for?
I'm not an American citizen. My organization is an NGO, so we're apolitical. But you know, there is one thing which I think is rather fun when I'm thinking about politics. Chimpanzees are very political. And when two males are competing for dominance, they stand upright, they swagger, they put a fierce face on, they may shake their fist. Doesn't this remind us of some human politics? And you won't get more than that out of me.
Did you see me doing the math in my head just now? I was like, should I actually get her to name this? You've really given your life to fighting, for this cause, for nature and our environment. And, you really do so. I mean, even now, with sort of kindness and encouragement and humor, you praise rather than scold, right? But you work so hard, and I mean, I see, I get a sense of how tiring it is, how hard it is on you, actually. And I just wonder if you must sometimes feel let down by those in power, or the people who are not acting with the urgency that scientists have said we must. Sort of, who are you disappointed in?
Well, who am I disappointed in? It's in every walk of life you find disappointment. But then, what's the answer? The answer is education. The answer is when you meet somebody who disagrees with you. I mean, I can meet somebody who disagrees with me about climate change or something, and I could argue. They're going to listen to me. So you have to reach the heart, not the head. And I do that by telling stories. And, for example, there was a CEO, I'd been talking to a group of CEOs, and he said to me, Jane, for 8 years I have been fighting to get my corporation more sustainable in the country where we source our product, in the supply chain, in our offices, and the way we treat our customers. 3 reasons. 1, seeing the writing on the wall, we're using up natural resources in some places faster than nature can replenish them. Secondly, consumer pressure. People are beginning to say, how was this product made? Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals, like intensive animal farming? Is it cheap because of unfair wages? If so, don't buy it. Will it cost a bit more? Well, then you'll value it more and waste less. We waste. But he said, what tipped the balance for me was my little girl of 10. She came back from school one day and she said, Daddy, they told me that what you're doing is hurting the planet. That's not true, is it, Daddy? Because it's my planet.
That is so interesting. It's interesting that a lot of the same people who are donating a lot of money to climate are also have companies that are selling a lot of things, right? And are you're in rooms with these people? Do you try and act as their conscience? I mean, is your view that you want to just get them to sort of make these incremental changes? Or sometimes do you think that there should be more radical change in terms of consumption? Frankly, it's something that you talk about a lot. You try to gently tell people to consume less, but it's a very unpopular message, right?
That's why you can't argue with them. You just have to find a story like that little girl. Mm-hmm. And you may not know that you've made a difference, but I've heard from people afterwards, what you said actually made me think differently. So many people have said that to me.
There's an ongoing debate about sort of among people who are activated on environmental issues in terms of sort of how much there should be a push for systemic change and how much it's like personal responsibility. And of course, there's been some seesawing on this over the years. I wonder how you see that balance. Do you think that people should really be, voting, pushing for systemic change, or like how much should they also be focused on the changes in their life, even if it feels, inconvenient, uncomfortable, or maybe that it doesn't matter as much?
Both are equally important. And, changing what you do in your life, it can be tough. Like, I became a vegetarian back in the very late 60s, understanding about intensive farming, which didn't exist when I went to Gombe. And the next time I looked at a piece of meat on my plate, I thought this symbolizes fear, pain, death. I don't want to eat that. And then I learned more recently about the horrible cruelty to to the cattle and the chickens and the, the egg layers and the milking dairy herds. And then I thought, well, I shall have to become vegan. And that's not easy.
So did you become a vegan for animal welfare reasons, or I thought you became a vegan for environmental reasons, just sort of in terms of, just the amount of land that is dedicated to sort of meat?
That was vegetarianism. And
was animal welfare?
Well, the welfare came with the cattle and the chickens. But it is, you use huge amounts of land to grow the grain, to feed the animals, and also the grazing, like in Argentina and so on. And it takes an awful lot of water to change plant to animal protein, and we're running out of water around the world. And this is terrible. Added to which, particularly cattle, put out masses of methane into the environment, and that's a very, very wicked greenhouse gas.
And do you encourage other people to eat a plant-based diet? Like, how much are you making these decisions for yourself versus really trying to advocate to people in your life to change their ways?
I just talk about why I changed.
So one of the problems I feel like that has been the thorniest in talking about some of these issues is that you haven't shied away from is human population, right? And I think we've been dancing around these sort of issues around sort of environmental issues versus economic growth. And these two things can sometimes feel like they're really in tension with each other, and human population can feel like a third rail that it's hard to talk about. But of course, the human population is still growing, requiring more food, more energy, and even as that's happening, there are people, economists and others, who are very worried about dropping birth rates, right? So those two, while the population is still growing, birth rates are going down, particularly in certain countries. How do you think about this?
Well, what I think about it is there's about 8 billion of us on the planet now. We're already beginning to run out of natural resources. And it's estimated there'll be about 50 billion of us in 2050. 10 billion in 2050. And what's going to happen then? So, I'm not an economist, and I know there's a big conflict, but I'm not the one to sort it out. I'm the one to point out, this is a problem. Let's get more minds together. We're the most intellectual creature that's ever walked on the planet. And notice I say intellectual rather than intelligent, because intelligent creatures don't destroy their homes. But we are intellectual, and, there's this big thing about AI now, so let the AI sort it out. I can't.
Do you think AI will?
No, I don't think it can, but...
AI requires more energy, too.
Oh, it does indeed. Yeah. Even Google and search engines, yes.
These trade-offs are tough, right?
I'm not the person to solve those things. I see them. I see there's a big, big problem, and it does need sorting out. But that's not my area of expertise. I can't sort it out. I can point it out.
But here you are traveling 300 days a year at 90. What are you hoping to accomplish? What does success look like for you?
Okay, the main thing, we have the Jane Goodall Institute, and you know vaguely what that's doing, protecting the environment. But we also have a youth program, Environmental and Humanitarian Roots and Shoots, which began in 1991. It now has members, kindergarten, university, everything in between.
And it's mostly a school-based program? Is it mostly based in schools?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It can be homeschooling. It can be a group of friends outside school. We've even got adults now, like the staff of some corporations. And we're in 71 countries. The 71st was last week, starting in Ukraine. And it can, you can't go to a country until there's somebody who says, this is great, I want to do this. And then it starts to grow.
One just started in Ukraine.
When?
In Ukraine, one just started?
Yes.
They have a lot that they're dealing with.
Yes, there's a woman there. She's working with schools, helping children to cope with the loss and fear. I understand that because I grew up in World War II. And so it's, you know, I'm the perfect person to say, because in Britain, everything was lost. You know, the whole of Europe had capitulated or been defeated, and there was nothing. I mean, we didn't have a strong army or air force or anything. And there was the might of the German army on the other side of the ocean there. But we had Churchill, and he roused the spirit of the British people. And, you know, his famous speech, we'll fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them in the streets, we'll fight them. And he turned aside to a friend and said, and we'll fight them with the ends of broken bottles, because that's all we bloody well got.
I've read about how sort of what an impactful experience it was for you growing up in World War II and then seeing the images of the Holocaust and then the bombs that were dropped and how that actually created some despair in you. You had been a very spiritual, sort of religious young girl, and then it made you question God. And yet, I believe that you've come back to hope. You've written a couple books about it, at least. Since I learned that I was going to be interviewing you, I've been basically asking everyone that I came across, like, what question would you want to ask Dr. Goodall? And over again, the vast majority of people said, you know, where do you find hope? Now, I know you've answered this. So you find hope in human intellect and spirit. You find hope in the resilience of nature. You find hope in the youth.
And the indomitable human spirit. Yeah. People who won't give up.
Yeah. There's also, though, like this concept of hopium, you know, sort of like people sort of hoping, like false hope. Like, how do you balance that? And yeah, how do you balance this sort of a false hope versus a true hope that's...
Because hope isn't just wishful thinking. Imagine our human race is at the entrance of a long, dark tunnel, at the end of which is a little star. That's hope. It's no good sitting at the mouth of the tunnel and wishing that hope would come to us. We've got to roll up our sleeves. The Bible says, gird your loins. I love that. I'm not quite sure what it means, but let's gird our loins, and we've got to climb over, crawl under, work around all the obstacles that lie between us and the star. And that's what we've been talking about: climate change, loss of biodiversity, poverty, overconsumption, industrial agriculture, all those things. But the good news, there are people tackling every one of those problems. The sad thing is so often they're working in silos, and they need to get together to think holistically, as I said earlier.
Thank you so very much.